All right. Welcome back, everybody. Happy Tuesday, and welcome to another Learning Tech Talks, where we are continually exploring the landscape of learning and workplace tech and all sorts of fun things. Today, we're talking micro-learning, but I feel like even that is a category in and of itself that has a level of depth that can't just be summarized in that. So to help me with this conversation, I think we're going to talk workflow learning. What do you think, Michael? Is that a better term?
I think that works. Yeah, I think that's good.
Bite size, I don't even know. I don't even know how we want to categorize it anymore. The industry categories are lost on me. So again, Michael Ioffel's back, which we were talking about this backstage. You were one of my very first guests back in 2019, pre-pandemic, and then you joined again right after the pandemic, but it's been 2 years since. So we've got a lot to talk through. So thanks for coming back.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for having me. And yeah, thrilled to be back.
Well, and so as people are joining in, I'm curious for those of you who are watching or listening live before you all tab and work on your other stuff, which we're going to engage you in this one as well. But feel free to let us know where you are, because Michael, let's see, when you first joined, you were out in Portland, I think, just kind of getting things rolling, and even just in our conversation, I think even by 2020 you had moved again, and then you've moved a couple others. So where are you now?
Great question. Yeah, things come full circle. So I'm back in Portland.
Okay, now you're back in Portland. All right.
Yeah. So currently living in New York and visiting my family in Portland for a few weeks. So yeah.
Okay. Okay. So you're not living in Portland. You're living in New York, but you're in Portland right now.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, for everybody watching, my background has never changed. Still joined by Fred. Oops, on this side, and yeah, here in Milwaukee. So let's get into this, because again, if people, I do think, even just talking about this episode coming up before we went live, I think Arist is a pretty well-known name now, which I don't think it was when you first joined in 2019. I think it was like, what is this whole text message thing, which was a very specific niche that you were targeting. It's since expanded. But for those who may not be as familiar, do like the 2-minute summary of how do you describe Arist now? Because I'd actually be curious how you describe it now versus how you did back in 2019.
Yeah, sure thing. So I think the super high level overview is that Arist helps companies like Amazon and Intel improve performance and shift behavior in the flow of the tools we use every single day, right? So
Okay.
what we're really focused on is how can we deliver learning in a bite-sized way, both learning and communications, in tools like Microsoft Teams, Slack, text message that folks actually engage with on a regular basis. And so what we find is that there's a ton of research on space learning and space behavior change. What we try to do is take all of the research on how to create effective learning outcomes and package it into a tool that's delivered, where people usually spend their time.
Okay. Because back in 2019, it really was focused on the text messaging side of things, which I remember when you and I first connected, I was really impressed with what you were doing with that and how you were taking really what often would be this very thick, meaty subject of a topic, and then actually kind of tearing it apart in a meaningful way and helping people digest it over time through text messaging. But it sounds like now, as you've gotten more into the corporate space, the need to be able to meet people in things like Teams and Slack and some of these other big communication tools is really, where do you find people using it most now? Is it an even split?
Yeah, great question. I think it really depends on the workplace. So what we're obsessed with is meeting people where they are and delivering the right learning in the right place in the right time. And what that looks like is that, for a frontline employee, that may be via text message or via WhatsApp, whereas for somebody at their desk, that usually is via Teams, sometimes Slack, depending on the company. So it really depends on where they sit in the organization, where they spend their time, really.
Okay. All right. Well, see, you didn't say WhatsApp before either. Okay. So what are the different tools that you really integrate well with? So you said Teams, Slack, text messaging. You mentioned WhatsApp. Are those the four, or are there other ones?
Yeah, sure. We also do email. So we have a number of clients that use Arist with Outlook. And then we're exploring Google Chat Google Chat, Zoom Chat, and WebEx on the horizon as well.
Okay. Okay. Got it. All right. So yeah, really those almost workplace techs that people are using every day as part of that. And so what's that journey looked like? Because if we were to take a trip down memory lane over the past couple of years, the first time you were on, it was pre-pandemic. And so I don't think any of us predicted what was going to happen in 2020. So I have no doubt that that put a little bit of jet fuel in the gas tank. But what if we were to kind of look down the trip of memory lane? What has that looked like? And then I actually want to get into kind of what it looks like today. But just even hearing that journey would be great.
Yeah, sure thing. Arist started initially as a way to deliver learning in war zones, right? So my background is in
Okay.
the nonprofit space, and the problem we were originally trying to solve was how can we deliver learning in the Yemeni war zone where nobody has access to the internet or access to a laptop, right? And so video courses were completely inaccessible, and text messages
Yeah.
were literally the only way we could deliver learning. I think what we found is that by breaking really complex subjects down into bite-sized chunks and delivering them in a spaced out way via text message, we started seeing much higher rates of adoption, engagement, and satisfaction because we were meeting people where they are. And so the initial approach was, okay, cool. Like, what else can we deliver by text message? And let's just use this one modality, and really perfected the learning model with this one modality. What we then started realizing is, along with using Arist for standalone experiences, a lot of our clients now use this for reinforcement and pre and post course engagement. And so
Okay.
over the course of the past 2 years, we've built a ton of tools to make Arist really, really easy to use for the enterprise. So along with like Slack and Teams integration, we've launched full LMS and HRS integrations, making it easy for Arist to be, to integrate seamlessly with a company's security infrastructure as well. So we're now fully SOC 2 compliant. And I think the really gratifying thing has been that we've seen enterprises take to Arist in a way that's been pretty incredible, right? With many of our
Okay.
clients, Arist is now one of the most widely used learning tools they have, largely because it's so easy to both create and deliver content in a really flexible way.
Okay. Well, and so as a follow up to that, because I think, and we'll spend some time unpacking this one a bit, but initially, and I remember this initially, kind of some of that primary use case was if you have digital content or a digital experience, this is just a way to, like you said, space it out
Yeah.
and make it a little bit more consumable, not only by putting it maybe in a tool where you're a little more familiar and more likely to engage, but also by making it a little more bite sized so that instead of having to go through a 8-hour workshop in one shot, you could take these bits by bits over time, actually doing stuff. And you had some engagement capabilities, which I want to flesh that out more too. But it sounds like, and this was to me always one of the things that I thought, and we can spend a little bit of time here on this, that I saw the opportunity, and it's interesting that that's now really picking up, is this pre and post live experience component, which is often one of the hardest parts for people in our field because of the fact that while in theory we'd love people to do the pre-work or actually reflect back or do something with what they learned, so often we're like, yeah, but we really have no way to get to them. So we'll send it out ahead of time and assume that nobody's going to look at it anyway, or we'll maybe just tell the manager, follow up, or we'll send them a couple things after and hope they do something, but really have limited. So I'm curious how have you really seen that accelerate?
Yeah, sure thing. I think, yeah, today reinforcement and sort of pre and post course engagement is a huge use case for us. I think a
Okay.
few key considerations why, right? If we look at the landscape of most L&D teams in terms of what they spend their time on, right? On one end of the spectrum, you have sort of basic communications, right? A lot of L&D teams are tasked with just delivering basic comms along with everything else they do. I think a typical L&D team today does like 30 jobs, right? It's like pretty insane. It's
I think everybody does like 30 jobs in 2022 at this point, just because things are changing so fast. It's like, can you do that? Okay, great. Why don't you just do
Yeah, yeah,
that then?
exactly. Yeah, it's insane. Right. But what we find is that, there's, if we go sort of up the ladder, right, there's communications and there's sort of basic e-learning experiences. Then you have these more in-depth, like virtual instructor-led trainings. And then you have these really, really complex and in-depth experiences that companies spend a ton of time and money on. What we find is that like 80% of the content is pretty fundamental, right? It's basic communications, basic skill building, and all of that should be delivered in a bite-sized way in the flow of work because it's just more agile and far easier to deliver, like in a way that people actually will engage with. Because companies today spend like a crazy amount of their time getting folks to come to these experiences. Like course marketing is a huge part of an L&D team's
It's
time.
huge.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's like we did some research and it was like 25 to 30% of an L&D team's time is just getting folks to show up, right? But what we find is that even for the really in-depth experiences, once you actually get folks to show up, even if people go through a super in-depth 8-hour workshop, they forget everything like 3 weeks later, right? And so the post-course reinforcement.
By the time they get on the plane, half the time.
Exactly. And look, the thing is that, as L&D practitioners, what we actually end up caring about, and the results that we care about driving, are performance improvement, knowledge retention, and behavior change. And none of those happen in the course of a one-time experience, right? All of those happen over the course of a longer period of time. And so what our goal is like, how can we help folks actually create and track, right, knowledge retention, performance improvement, and behavior change over a longer period of time in the tools that folks actually use, so we don't have to go chase them, right?
Okay. Well, and I, one of the things, because I said I want to spend a little bit of time on here, and I got a couple other ones for you, so don't worry, we'll fill the time, no problem. But with this one, I am really curious, and for those of you who are watching, I'm curious how other folks are doing this absent of this, because this is a real challenge, and I totally get it. Sometimes people assume because I'm big into tech that I am opposed to all things live, and I'm not. I mean, look at this. We're going live, right? So obviously I see value in doing things live because there is that opportunity to connect and collaborate and brainstorm, and there's all sorts of value in bringing people together. But what I'm not a fan of is when we waste that precious time on telling you things. Just because there are so many better ways to get information to people than sitting them in a room. But at the same time, I also recognize the challenge we're often faced with, which is, well, they don't pay attention. We're in the attention economy,
right?
And they've got 10 million things grappling for their attention. So sometimes we've had to rely on that live time to go, well, that's the only way I can actually get them out of their email, out of their work, out of their stuff to actually capture their attention. So it is a little bit of this paradigm, which is why I can see this being really helpful. But I'm curious, how are you seeing organizations make that shift? Because I think a lot of times people suggest, yeah, we know we need to do it. And then when they actually have the chance to, it's hard to let go of. Like if you're a facilitator and you're used to like, well, the way I deliver this course is just so good and I get to see the aha moments and all this, it's a lot harder to pry this stuff out of people's claws than we sometimes recognize when you get into it. And I'm curious how you've helped people through that journey, because it can kill you.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think what we often recommend is 2 things, right? One is take a really hard look at your learning ecosystem and at the content you're delivering, and really think about, what content do we actually need to do in person, right? What content actually benefits from it being collaborative and in-depth and having that nuance in-person experience or live experience. And what we find is that really only like 10 to 20% of content fits that need, and it really should be delivered in that way. And then what you can do is you can take a look at the rest of your content and say, okay, most of this content doesn't really need to be delivered in an LMS or LXP and can be delivered in a more bite-sized way, because ultimately what we're trying to do is just get people to verify that they actually read the information, right? Or verify that they actually understood like some sort of core skill or core component.
Yeah, we're trying to baseline it. We're just trying to be like, look, do you at least have some requisite knowledge of what this is, so that when we bring you together to discuss it, you're not looking at us like a deer in headlights going, I'm not sure what we're talking about.
Yeah, and for us, what we recommend is that folks start small, right? You don't have to like build a ton of reinforcement or transfer all of your learning experiences into a different format, right? Like pick 1 to 2 experiences to reinforce, or 1 to 2 experiences to convert into a bite-sized format, and then just test it, right? See how it goes. And what people, one of the things that we often say is that today, learning leaders are not competing with anybody for their employees' time, but TikTok and Twitter, right? Like that's ultimately who you're competing with. And so there's a mandate to make learning more consumerized, more friendly and engaging. And if you give learners the option to have a more like consumerized learning experience that meets them where they are, they will prefer that, and they will give you the data to indicate like, hey, okay, we should make a more meaningful investment here.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk. I'm also curious, because you brought this up, and I think this is a really important one. And I'm curious how you manage this with folks, because one of the things that where I see a conundrum for the employees is we talked backstage about the fact that a lot of times we think the stuff we're putting people through is novel and unique, when in reality, it's not. And chances are people have had some level of exposure to it. Maybe
Yeah.
not super deep, but they are at least maybe familiar. And you're dealing with a wide range. Some people may know a ton. Some may be like, I've never even heard of this kind of stuff. And I do feel like that always adds a layer of complexity because, and you do live time too. You like start talking through it. Half the class is tuned out. The other half is really engaged. How do you manage that then with Arist, or even just as you think about this pre-work or post where you go, well, we want to make sure they're at a certain level, but we're not going to clockwork orange people through the experience and actually, did you read every word? Well, I don't care if you read every word. What I care about is, do you understand the basics?
Yeah, I sure think so. First off is just, sort of basic branching, right? So what we can do is ask
Okay.
people questions and ask people quizzes and just verify like, hey, if you know this, we'll just fast
Okay,
forward.
so you have some adaptability built into it, even by default, to be able to change the experience based on what they already know.
Yeah, and we're adding more adaptability features over the course of the next 2 quarters as well. Because
Okay.
at the end of the day, we want to ensure that if somebody's learning something that it's relevant to them, and because what we're doing is breaking down the atomic unit of learning, right? Like previously, the atomic unit of learning was like an hour, right? Like an hour long video. Our goal is to break it down into like the smallest possible knowledge block, right? That we can
Okay.
reasonably deliver content in. And so we
Get
can say,
down to the neutrons and electrons.
exactly. Yeah. And we can say, okay, cool. If you understand this, then you don't need to learn like these 4 other like neutrons and electrons. We can just fast forward you to like this thing over here. So yeah,
Okay.
I think that's from a technology point of view, it's super doable. It's just a matter of folks intelligently using it, right?
Okay. Okay. Well, and then from that, I have to imagine, and this can kind of talk a little bit about some of the functionality as well. From an analytics standpoint, I mean,
Yeah.
to me, that's one of the benefits of doing this digitally versus live, which is why for me, the whole knowledge transfer live,
Yeah.
it just drives me bonkers because I'm like, not only is it just not as effective of a way to do it, but the fact we really can't pulse whether or not people know it. We can say, oh, I thought I saw light bulb moments, or people seem to understand, but we don't necessarily really know. Where I think, I'm curious on the analytics side. You've said you've come quite a ways in terms of what those analytics are. I have to imagine then that's a part of it because you can actually start to see like, well, what is the maturity or what is the knowledge baseline of this group of people or of these individuals that are going to be coming to this?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're not at a point where we can capture far more data in Arist than in any LMS, right? And the reason why is because we're interacting with learners every single day over the course of a long period of time.
I thought you said you're not, and I'm like, wait, what? I would feel like you absolutely would be. Okay, you said you're yes.
We are, far more data, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. To clarify, we are capturing data.
It's like you said not, but you're saying everything sounds to me like you are. No, yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
I got it.
I think 2 interesting things that we found as a result, right? So we can capture like satisfaction, completion, engagement, etc. The 2 things that get really fascinating are we can actually zoom into specific knowledge bites and say, hey, in this data analytics course, it seems like folks are really struggling on this specific concept or case study. And so what we can do is we can just adjust that concept or case study or add a reinforcement to it to cover that specific knowledge gap, right? So we can get really granular in terms of what folks are getting and not getting. The other thing that we can do is because we're capturing data over a longer period of time, we can actually verify long-term behavior change and performance improvement and knowledge retention as well. We can check in with learners 30, 60, 90 days later and say, hey, do you remember this? Why or why not? Like what have you like actually implemented this skill? And so that just gives us a lot of data on like, okay, cool, people are actually implementing and using this, right?
Okay. Well, and I think that going back to kind of the identity crisis that can come with this. I mean, this is a real thing where if you're used to delivering these courses live, and a lot of what you've based your strengths on is your ability to kind of reach a class, read a class, do some of this stuff. It can feel a little like, wait, so this tool's going to be doing this for like that it can be a little bit creepy or threatening. But to the point of what you even just shared with this, I feel like the view and lens you can get into your audience actually allows you to be a more dynamic facilitator because you're actually able to see, especially I'm just thinking pre-work. We can also think of post-work, but I'm thinking pre-work as you're preparing these folks to come to this, which first of all, it's already hard enough to get enough people to show up.
Yeah.
But now if they're starting to see some incentive of, oh, these are some of the things we're going to be getting into and all of these other things is huge. But then also you can start to see, okay, based on this group, these are some of the key areas where, you know what, I actually can probably spend less time on this because that doesn't necessarily really seem to be a gap
Yeah.
or an area people are struggling versus, whoa, clearly this is an early stage. They are not familiar with some of these concepts and what it actually looks like, which then you can actually spend time and personalize that precious lifetime far more than you could if you just said, well, you showed up. I don't really know what you did. So let's try and get through all this.
Yeah, 100%. And the thing is look, in a hybrid or virtual setting, the time that we have in person or the time that we have live is incredibly precious, right? As you said, like we can't waste that time. And so what it ultimately does is it lets facilitators be that much better at doing what they do because everybody shows up to a session like knowing a baseline of knowledge, engaged and ready to learn because they've already covered all of the core essentials. And the in-person time is really used for collaboration, in-depth discussion, getting into the details, right? It's just a better use of time. So
okay. So Ethan, by the way, I see your questions. I'm going to ask the one just kind of in conversation because it makes sense where we are right now. And then the second one is actually something that I want to dig into a little bit more. So I am curious on the kind of pre or post. I like the way Ethan put it, the drip campaigns.
Yeah.
Almost in a sense of kind of saying, hey, let's drip some of this stuff either before and after to kind of sustain what we're trying to do here. I'm curious if you see some trends around how long or what kind of trends are you seeing around that? Is it something that there's consistency? Is it really dependent on the depth of the topic? Are there any best practices you're seeing coming out of this?
Yeah, and you're not going to like my answer. The answer is that it varies, right?
I actually will like it because I say it depends to everything.
Yeah. I think it's so. One of the things that we try to practice and that we work with our clients to practice as well is starting with the outcome and working backwards, right? I think that's oftentimes a tough thing to do, but let's say we're designing an experience on performance management, where we're training our managers on how to be better at doing performance reviews on an annual basis, right? What we ultimately want is managers to have these like maybe 7 core skills or like a strong understanding of these 7 things. And so if we're designing an experience, we want to work backwards, right? And really understand, okay, how can we build an experience to build that confidence over time? And the reality is, that might be a 10-day experience if we're doing a training on, for example, a specific DEI topic, or a 5-day experience if we're just doing a quick data analytics crash course, right? It really just depends. And the timeline also depends on how long we want people to continue engaging and practicing this skill. Like DEI, that's something that we want people thinking about every single week over the course of a very long period of time because it's a really fundamental skill and a very fundamental practice, right? Whereas data analytics is something we can maybe nudge folks, once a quarter about, right? Stuff like that.
Okay. So I kind of set you up on that one on purpose because I was hoping that's where you would go. Because I think that is sometimes one of the things where people are looking for this universal answer. Oh, okay. So if we have sessions, how long should our pre-work be and how long should our post-work? And it's the wrong question to be asking. The right question to be asking is, what are you really trying to accomplish? How deep is the transformation? I mean, how much depth is there actually to it? Well, let that define it versus going, okay, we've got 3 weeks ahead of time. How much information can we pack into those 3 weeks? So I appreciated that's what the data is showing too, because a lot of times I'm going off of personal experience and just conversations I have, but it's always great hearing from the vendors like, well, you're the one doing this with lots of folks, and what are you seeing? And it sounds like it's really back into the right solution based on what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, 100%. Yep.
Okay. So here's a question that, and Ethan, I'm going to pull this one up because I do agree with this. And this is something that I've had to battle in a number of organizations. When you start, this is where the integration of work into life can get a little bit messy when you're dealing with hourly employees and you're dealing with, okay, well, they're not officially on the clock. Are we pushing? I'm curious how you're working with organizations around that, because I've got some perspectives and things I've learned over the years, and I've made plenty of mistakes with this one too, but I'm curious what you're seeing with it.
Yes. So this is an area where we've gotten really creative, and we've been lucky to have a lot of states as clients that have very strict regulations that we've been able to sort of work with. So here's what we do very tactically. We know that employees, especially if they're hourly employees who don't have a company on mobile device, will not download an app. Right, that's just already a no-go. Right, and the qualifications for delivering learning on hourly employee personal devices are threefold. One, it needs to come during their shift time because they can't be learning outside of work hours. Two, they can't be charged for learning. Right, if we're delivering learning via via an app, they get charged for the data, right, for downloading like that app. So what we do is two things. One is all of our messages are delivered toll-free. So learners, if they're receiving content on their personal device, will never receive a charge for the message. The second thing that we do is we integrate with the HRS, or a shift scheduling system, to lock content to a learner's shift time. Right. So if a learner is on a shift from 8 to 4, they can only engage in that content from 8 to 4. And the third thing that we do is that we have a wage and hour compliant opt-in process. So learners can plug in their personal device. We automatically encrypt it and then give them a secure opt-in process. And so that way learners could, on an hourly basis, can learn on their personal device while still maintaining wage and hour compliance and not adding any costs to the employer or the employee.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the comprehensiveness behind that, and the fact, because inevitably, to me, this is always one of the risks. I mean, for learning leaders out there, if you have hourly employees, it is something you have to be thoughtful about, because you can get yourself in some major, major trouble if you're like, hey, this is great. We can push learning to people, 24 hours a day. And all of a sudden the conversation comes up of like, well, am I getting paid to do this type? And you can find yourself with general counsel real quick. And there's some very uncomfortable conversations if you aren't prepared for them. But I am curious with some of that, because this is one of the things that I think sometimes is really important from a company standpoint, is the culture of mandatory. I think that's one of the things that you really have to look at, because it's like, yes, if you're forcing people to do things, then yes, it's one of those things. But if you're creating a culture where people want to do it, it's different. It's different because it's like, I'm not making them do that. And I think the fact you have that opt-in to go, listen, we're not going to make you do this, but if you want the flexibility because this is interesting to you and you want to be able to receive this on your personal device, here's the opt-in, so we can make sure we check all the legal boxes. It says just FYI, you're not getting paid for this and da-da-da-da, but we want to give you the flexibility, which I think we're going to have to deal with more and more as we start focusing more on consumer grade experiences that people actually want to engage with.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is look, 99% of folks opt in. Right, like the actual rates of people opting in, if you make opting in as easy as texting a code to a number, are incredibly high, right? And what I find interesting,
that's what I was going to ask, is what you're actually seeing with the opt-in, which it sounds like it's extremely high.
Yeah, super high. And then for folks who don't want to use SMS, they can always use WhatsApp or email as well as a backup, right? And so between the three modalities, like we essentially get to cover everybody. And again, like people, especially what we recommend in terms of rollout planning is start off with optional enrichment experiences, right? And then dive into compliance training from there, right? So start off by, training your frontline employees.
Professional development stuff is a good, versus this is mandatory annual training.
Right. And you can get to the annual training eventually, right? But like a lot of it is just about having that first experience, be like, oh, hey, I'm learning about like my 401k or like my credit score, or learning about like my company's financial statements, and like learning about data analytics, right? Like the company's investing in me on a device that I already use. And then eventually it's like, okay, my compliance training is here. That's not too bad, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that, because I think that's something you could walk away from and miss if you're thinking about this in terms of how to stage and prioritize this, where it may be, well, what the business may be trying to push for is get the compliance because we're just trying to push completion type of a thing, versus going, yeah, but that's not necessary. Like, that's not the kind of stuff that people go, you know what? I would like the convenience of being able to look at this whenever so that I can take care of it on my own time type of a thing.
Yep.
But once they warm up to, okay, there's value coming through this channel, I'm more open to some of these things that it's like, well, the convenience of not having to deal with this during my shift type of a thing, because it's not that bad anyway, and it's much
Yeah.
easier for me to consume it for that. It's easier to win people over if you approach it like that. So I'm glad you actually brought that up.
Yeah, yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, again, a lot of it is if you ask people where they want to be met, like they'll tell you, right? So
Okay. One question that came up with Joseph, it's actually kind of an interesting one. And I don't even know that you'll have an answer at this point, but I can see this maybe, when we check in, as we check in further down the road, because I think, unless you've been under a rock, every company is trying to solve this skills thing.
yeah,
And everybody's using the word skills and skill development, and we're a skill-based organization and yada, yada, yada. But actually understanding what skills are and the fundamental process it takes to develop them. I know you said it depends on this, but it'll be really interesting. And I'm just even curious if there's any just even coincidental type things that you're picking up that are starting to say this actually is the complexity of what we're dealing with when we talk about actual skill growth. Because this idea that people can develop skills in a couple days, it's like you can't. You
yeah.
can't do it.
Yeah, so 2 points of view that and just 2 pieces of data that we found, right? So one is that if you're a developer, I'll use like fundamentals of data analytics as an example. It's like one of the
Okay.
most popular skills that we've seen, right? So if you are on a data analytics pathway and your goal is to be like, reach a certain level of comprehension of data analytics, if we're training you on fundamentals of data analytics, what we find is that in 10 lessons, we can usually get you to a baseline where your level of confidence in that skill goes from like, 40% to like 70%, right? So we can
Okay.
usually get some pretty meaningful increases in confidence right off the bat. And confidence in application is really at the end of the day how we can actually measure skills, right? Like, are you confident in your ability like to use a skill? Are you
Well, because confidence is your willingness to actually take action on it. If you're not confident, you're not even going to be willing to step off the diving board and jump in the pool.
Yeah, exactly. But then what we find is that in terms of getting folks from like 70 to 95%, right, to full comprehension, that depending on the complexity of the skill will usually take anywhere from 2 months, sometimes to 8 months, right? Because the thing is that we need to get people in the practice of, okay, I'm going to understand a part of this skill. I'm going to go ahead and practice it in my workplace. I'm going to get feedback, reflect on it, right, and then go back. And so what Arist says is we try to facilitate, here's some knowledge, go practice it, go reflect on it and verify what you did, and then we'll send you the next lesson from there, right? And the reality is, look, a lot of these skills are like if we look at data analytics, it's not a one and done, right? Like you don't take a data science course and all of a sudden you're a data scientist, right? You are constantly learning. Like you are
Despite
constantly
some of the trends you see on LinkedIn with people
right.
updating their credentials after they took one Coursera course.
Yeah, it's like no, like the field is constantly evolving, constantly learning, right? Like learning is naturally continuous. It needs to be continuous, right? Like because somebody got a master's degree in instructional design doesn't mean that they are an instructional designer, right? They're an instructional designer because they're
Right.
practicing, applying content, learning, reflecting, and it's an ongoing process that really never ends, right? So that's sort of our point of view. Yeah.
Okay. Well, and I mean, it sounds like it's more than just a point of view because you're actually starting to see some of the data behind how organizations are actually growing these skills, and you can start backing into it and going, well, this isn't just my opinion. This
Yeah.
is we're looking at some of the best organizations in the world and the timelines they're actually putting on these. And I think that point is really important for folks in our field to consider. And I think we need our business stakeholders to come on board with that as well, because you really divided it into two meaningful categories. One is just this competence.
Yeah.
Are you competent? We can move the trajectory relatively quickly on that. Like, are you at least baseline competent? You can have an educated conversation about the topic, maybe answer some questions and understand the fundamentals. That we can kind of get you on trajectory fairly quickly. But if it's no, you actually effectively have to be putting that knowledge into practice.
Yeah.
That's months.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, that's months and months of work, not just like, oh, I watched a 30-second thing and then, went back to my day.
Exactly. And the thing is like one of the things that we often think about is using learning as lead generation, right? What I mean by that is that in a
Okay.
learning ecosystem, right, you have a lot of fundamental content and you have a lot of really complex content. I think a big mistake that a lot of organizations make is they say, we're going to take somebody who doesn't know anything about data science and throw them into a data science path, right?
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is people drop out and the experience fails, right? Because you need to get people from 0 to 1 before you can get them from 1 to 10, right? You can't get them from 0 to 10. And so a lot of the use cases that we find a lot of our clients use Arist for is, how can we get a bunch of folks from 0 to 1 on data analytics or data science, and then for folks that are interested in going further, we'll then use that as lead gen to get them into a more in-depth program, right? But it's really
Okay.
saging the experience and not having people go into a 9-month data science pathway when they have never used like a calculator, right? Like you need to be
Well, and I actually love the fact you bring that up, because fundamentally, as we think about our content strategy as learning leaders, and even the way we influence, business, I know talent mobility platforms, and I know there's a lot happening in the skills space that is giving us greater insight into what our workforce is capable of and what there's interest of. But there is still that personal touch. I mean, just as an example, I even think back to I did a ton of software engineering. I mean, skill wise, everybody said, well, you should be a software engineer. It's easy for you, but I hated it. I'm like, this is not what I want to do. So just because somebody's fundamentally capable of doing it, and even maybe very talented at it, doesn't necessarily mean, well, we as an organization should push them in that direction, because they may be very unhappy. And I like the idea of saying, what is that? Well, again, we talk a lot about the lessons we can learn from marketing, but how are we actually generating leads on who are the people that actually have interests in this? And yes, we can then augment that with our skill data to say, okay, who's actually capable? Because we want to find the people who are going to have the easiest trajectory to get there, but then who are also the ones that want to do it. And then let's put them in maybe the, in-depth platform versus enrolling them in that. And then the first class they take, they go, yeah, no, I mean, interesting, not interested type of a thing.
Right. Yeah. I think, like, if you think about it, if you think about what the business is asking for, right? Oftentimes what the business is asking of us is not like, hey, can you develop 14 data scientists? Sometimes it is, but oftentimes what the business is asking for is, hey, can you train, like, we need everybody in our financial services organization to very quickly get an understanding of blockchain, right? How can we get people to like basic competence very, very quickly? And what we're really focused on is how can we deliver sort of fundamental competence at scale, right? Because with this, like, one of the things that we really care about is how can you very, very quickly design and build like a blockchain course, push it to everybody in the organization, be like, cool, everybody now has a base level understanding of blockchain, right? Because at the end of the day, the way that the speed at which business moves, learning needs to move at that speed as well, right?
Okay. Well, and I think, and you are right in that, in terms of a lot of times that is what our stakeholders are underneath the surface saying. We just, and I just think of examples where it's been like, we need people to understand the impact of technology on healthcare.
Yeah.
I don't need you to know how our AI algorithms are improving image quality. That's not necessarily the level of depth, but we do need you to understand how artificial intelligence is improving the way we do healthcare and all of that. And that's a competence. You're probably not going to use it every day in your job, but we at least want you to go, okay, I kind of get the fundamental impact that this is having on our business.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. 100%.
So then this is going to steer us into this direction because, and we talked about this right before we went live, some of this then, and I've seen these wage in heated debates of, well, that's not training, that's communication. And sometimes I feel like maybe we don't need to have that argument. So I am curious how you're seeing organizations use this, where that is kind of what we're getting at. And going back to sometimes what stakeholders want, they're like, I don't need people to demonstrate deep skill competency in this, but I do need to know they at least understand it. And that is a baseline business requirement for us. So how are people navigating that?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I think the line is blurring a ton, right? And I think ultimately the way that we frame it internally is, our job as a platform is to deliver the right learning or information to the right individual at the right time in the right place, right? And sometimes that learning or information, right? So sometimes it's more substantive content about like the applications of AI in medicine, right? And sometimes that content is tied to a larger pathway of content and is designed to achieve some sort of performance outcome. But in some cases, people just want to send something, like send a message or send a brief lesson, and have people confirm that they read it. That's it, right? They just want confirmation that what was said was read. And so for us, the interesting part is that it's the same model. It's just like one lesson of that model, right? And that fulfills the communications need. I think, look, I don't think it's a bad thing that learning teams are asked to do more communications and information delivery, because at the end of the day, it gives us greater understanding of all of the content information that the learner is receiving. And it gives us, the ability to then use that communication for lead gen into more in-depth experiences, right? I think it gives us a lot of power as L&D practitioners. But, I think from that point of view, we've just said, okay, we're going to make it really easy to both create communications and learning experiences, and folks can kind of decide what is what, and like we'll make it flexible for people, right? Because at the end of the day, it is converging, right? I think it's just kind of
and you hit on a couple things, and I'll take a point of view as a practitioner on this, that I feel like sometimes this is a hill we try and die on that we need to stop trying to die on, because it's creating more problems for us than solutions. And I understand sometimes where it comes from, which is I cannot count the number of times I've been in the conversations where it's, can't we put this in the LMS and assign it to everybody and force them to do it and whatever. And I agree that that is a terrible use case for an LMS, and nothing annoys employees more than having some mandatory training show up in their inbox and they go, good grief, and I've got to go through this thing. But I think a lot of times we haven't had a better solution. And I think what you're getting at with some of this is, well, but there is a better way, and there is value in that. And actually with it comes tremendous power.
Yeah.
Because I can say, leaning into, in some of the best organizations I've worked with, they actually have learning and communications together, because it's one of these, well, rather than split the hairs on what's what, let's actually pair the two, because sometimes the lens that a learning professional may bring to a communication to go, well, wait a minute, is there something we actually want to ask people to do, or something we need them, to kind of do a little bit more with? That lens is actually really powerful for communications. And there's really valuable things from communications folks that go, I get you've built this really robust development experience, but people don't really even understand what that experience is. And we kind of need to build a little more robust stuff around that to help give some context to folks. But with that, I think you hit on one of the really important things. Is this is where that a lot of that power comes from, in terms of understanding the employee experience.
Yeah.
Because when you're involved in those conversations, you quickly realize why our workforce is so tapped out.
Yeah.
As you go, good grief, if I had to sit and try and read through and navigate all this information hitting me from a million different directions, I too would probably be a little bit overwhelmed. But it also, like you said, helps you realize, okay, this is where people really are in need.
Yeah, 100%. And I think if you think about like where the core frustration comes from, right, for both the learner and for L&D teams, it's that the LMS is being misused, right? Like the LMS is not designed to be a communications tool, right? And what ends up happening is like people get training that really should be communications and shouldn't be delivered in the LMS. I think that's sort of like, I think, look, our point of view, and we're super biased, right? But our point of view is that, like just to be blunt, like our point of view is that so many of the challenges that L&D teams face are because the LMS hosts us hostage, right? And is not.
It does.
And like LMSs are great for certain things, right? They're really, really good for certain things. But the fact that a tool that was invented by the Department of Defense for fighter jet compliance, right, is being used to shift behavior, right? Like that's
our primary learning experience platform
and communication platform, right? It's just not what it was designed to do.
No. Well, and I think that's one of those parts where I get the conundrum. And this is where I think, as learning professionals, I understand why we're trying to die on the hill sometimes, because it is, to your point, it's like, we know this is a terrible employee experience, and we hate, and again, and this is another one I get, is then people look at us, right?
Yeah.
They go, you guys are awful because you keep pushing this crap at us. And we're like, we did not do this. We had nothing to do with it. We did not want to do this, but your name's attached to it. And so it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, that learning and development team that keeps jamming these stupid PDFs down our throat, I would have rather just gotten an email. The gate told me to give a heads up. But I think we have an opportunity to lean in on this and say, well, then let's come up with a better solution, because it's a legitimate business need.
Oh
And
yeah.
dying on the hill a lot of times turns into a perception that we're denying that
Yeah.
it's a need. We're arguing you don't need that. And it's like, actually, yes, we do, but we need to help them see a better path.
Yeah. And look, our ultimate goal is that, is to give sort of the L&D team the power to say, hey, okay, if this is communication or like more fundamental training, then put it over here, right? If this is something that needs to be in an LMS, then we'll put it in the LMS. But I think a lot of it just comes down to the tools that L&D teams have, right? Because then if an L&D team has the tools to say, okay, hey, business, we're going to put this communication in a tool that's actually designed for it, right? It just gives folks a bit more flexibility. And that way, the L&D team doesn't get the flack of delivering communication in an LMS, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting in the sense that I'm surprised. I mean, while I spend a lot of time in the learning HR tech space, I actually talk to, that's why I say workplace tech, because I talk to a lot of tech companies and communication tools, corporate communication tools. Honestly, they aren't always the best at addressing this actual need. They're actually really bad at it. They're terrible at it. It's like, well, we can push it out and maybe we can get like, some general how many people looked at it. And it's like, that's not what people want. They want to know, we sent a message to this target audience because we're about to roll out this initiative into this division. And we need to make sure that they know that this is coming for them. And it's like, well, we can't really tell you that. And that's when they come knocking on our door going, okay, you need to put this learning in the LMS and choke it down people's throats because we can't get the need we actually need to address.
Yeah, honestly, it blows my mind, right? Like, we just launched a feature called Verified Comms, where essentially you can send a message like in Teams or in Slack, and people have to text back to verify that they got it, and it reminds them every single day, like, hey, like until they actually engage, like, hey, like, right? And what blows my mind is that it's like fundamentally like that's kind of like what like we've been surprised that doesn't exist yet, right? I think there's a lot of
I
these
know.
things, like, how does this not exist, right? How is a corporate communications tool just people sending an email that looks nice, right, and that tracks open rates? Like it's just a newsletter. There's no difference,
Right. Or creates a news feed, but we
right?
still don't really know how people engage with the news feed other than we can be like, well, comment in or like it if you, and
Right.
it's like, well, but that doesn't tell us anything.
Yeah.
So I think to your point and hearing more about what you're doing in this space is actually, I'm glad we talked about this, because this is one of those things where what I've found in my career is when you have a solution to people's problems,
Yeah.
you have so much more credibility in the boardroom when people are going, we need to figure out how to do this. And they're frustrated. And you go, hey, what if we did it like this? And that's how you get out of this order taking mode, is when people go, here's what we need to do. And you go, I hear you, but I actually have a better alternative. Most people are actually pretty open to going, oh, I mean, that actually sounds better than what we were originally planning. But when we're just like, no, we don't do that, that's a really good way to put a big target on your back.
100%. Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so you mentioned that capability. I'm also curious because we, with a little bit of the time we have left, what other kind of functionality or capability have you built in more recently, or are you looking at? Because I'm really curious to hear, looking where you've been in 3 years from, it was this kind of separate platform, distinct from the ecosystem that was really focused on text messaging, to now this kind of integrated drip spaced, in the flow of the tools people are using. Like, what else are you looking at or doing now?
Yeah, I mean, we've been cooking, right? So there's a ton of stuff that's been
We
happening.
can geek out on this for the rest of the show. It's totally fine.
What's up?
We can geek out on this for the rest
Oh
of the
yeah,
show.
yeah, perfect. Yeah, so I think two things. We've done a bunch of stuff that we're pretty proud of. I think the three things we're probably most excited about are first off, making it far easier for folks to pull content and to pull templates from their peers.
Okay.
right? Because at the end of the day, if somebody's already developed a career development course that works really well, there's no need for you to reinvent the wheel. And so we're enabling folks to sort of pull anonymized templates from their peers and use that content, for their own organization.
And by peers, though, I want to flesh this out. We're not just talking like people within your own organization. These may be other Arist clients who've opted in and said, yes, I'm willing to share our top whatever professional development course with your library that you can then pull from. And I'm assuming customize as well. So if it's like, well, it's like 85%, you can tweak it around.
Exactly. Yeah, I think what we find is that, in the learning space, there's fully custom courses that are super expensive, or there's like content in LinkedIn Learning that's kind of locked away. And our goal is to kind of meet people halfway, where we have really, really high quality courses that we know work well, that your team can customize really easily. So we've been building out that template library a ton. The two things that I'm probably most excited about that we're releasing over the course of the next quarter are, one, something we call Arist automations, right? And so what that means is that based on data in HRIS, or based on data in Salesforce, or essentially using any points of data in an organization to trigger learning experiences, right? Because what we find is that we already know the moments of need for a manager. We know that every single year they have to do performance reviews. And we know that we can, at that time, trigger a course on, hey, here's how to avoid bias in performance reviews and deliver the right learning at the right time. So a lot of it is just taking data from an organization and creating those automations internally to contextualize learning.
Now, do you have, with that one, I'm just curious with that, because I think this is one of those, is that being just automatically triggered off of other systems, or do you actually have like an interface in which, and again, I know it's still coming, but is this something where you can almost, a campaign manager in some regards, where you're like, based on this event, we know these are the things that we want to hit different folks?
The latter.
Both?
The latter. So essentially the thing that, essentially it's like a workflow builder where you can say, okay, I want, all of my frontline managers, every single time there's a new update to California's workplace harassment policy, to get this course or to get this communication, right? And essentially being able to route, because a lot of that stuff happens manually today, right?
Yeah. It's very manual. Going back to this communication process, either it's manual or just doesn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, think about it this way, right? Like, if for many of our clients, right, if somebody becomes a first-time manager, they have to wait sometimes like 3 months to go through a first-time manager onboarding pathway, right? So they're managing people for 3 months, right? And then 3 months later, they're like, okay, cool, welcome to your new manager onboarding, right? And so for us, like one of my favorite use cases there is, as soon as somebody becomes a new manager in Workday, we can just trigger the right content to them in Slack or Teams, right? And enroll them in a pathway automatically. So yeah, we're pretty excited about that. And then I think the last thing that we're working on is auto recommending courses in Slack or Teams based on what we know about someone's interests, right? So if we know that somebody's interested in data science, we can, on a monthly basis, recommend them more and more data science pathways or courses and sort of nudge them to engage that way, right? So kind of that mix of push and pull.
Okay, so kind of combining the, what you were saying, the lead gen in some regards, maturing the lead gen where it's like, well, you're doing this kind of stuff. These are some of the other things we have that are possibly relevant, so that you can kind of see how people are maturing down that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the cool thing is that, once we have the learner's attention, right? Once we have a conversation with the learner via text message or Teams or Slack, everything changes, right? The amount of data that we can capture changes. Our ability to interact with the learner more often changes, right? It just gives us a ton more flexibility to really engage with learners in a meaningful capacity.
Okay. All right. So final question for you, since again, it's kind of like the 3-year anniversary for us on this one. Is there anything over the past few years, as you kind of look back on this, that you thought you were going this way and you just went in a direction you did not expect? I mean, you've kept pure, because I remember pushing you back in the beginning of like, well, are you thinking of going this or this and this? And you were pretty, and you have, I mean, hearing what you're doing with it, I think you've expanded in meaningful ways while staying true to what you initially set out to do, which is commendable. Are there any things that you go, this was just a totally unexpected thing that we didn't see coming?
That is an awesome question. Man, what a question. I don't know if there is, to be honest. I think, look, I'm 23. I've never worked at a company other than Arist. So for me, like,
That's the funny part, because I remember 3 years ago, like I think you were still at Babson, weren't you?
Yeah, I was. Yeah. So I think when we I think I was like 19 when we had our first chat, like 19.
Yeah.
And I think I just turned 20. And look, I think the reality is that I never thought that I would be, a 23-year-old working in learning and development. I didn't know that learning and development existed as a profession or as a field, right?
Okay.
So I think that's the thing that's caught me off guard the most. But I think for me, like the way that I see it, learning and development is the single most impactful role in an organization. And the reason I feel that way is because if you really think about it, you know, every single one of us oversees a university, right? Like some of the largest universities in the world, right? Like if you're the head of learning at McDonald's, you oversee, right, like a 1 million-person university. And I think that gives us tremendous power to do good, right? If we're able to truly invest in people, and if we're able to use, the resources that we have to truly create learning experiences for people who never finished high school, never finished college, I think that's incredibly, incredibly exciting. And so, for me, I think that's why, like, I truly believe that learning and development is one of the greatest, like, has one of the greatest capacities to do good in the world, because we're reaching people who oftentimes never had learning experiences that truly develop them, and we're doing it in the context of organizations that have the power to pay people better, right, to develop people, et cetera. So that's probably the most unexpected thing for me. I love the space. I think it's absolutely incredible.
Yeah. No, I love that. What a great note to end on too, because I'm with you on that. I think sometimes we don't even in our field, I don't think we fully understand the potential impact we can have on an organization, which why for me it's so frustrating when I see us squander that.
Yeah.
When I'm like the tremendous power and influence and impact we can have on a person's life. I mean, we can literally change the course of someone's life through the work that we do in a very positive way. And so when I see things where I go, and that's what we're doing with all this potential, it can send me up a wall sometimes. So no, I have tremendous respect for what you did. And again, from the 19, 20-year-old college student who was out to change the world in third world war-torn countries, that now has taken that and brought it into a wide array. I have to imagine, I mean, you've got to be doing stuff in academia as well, I would imagine. Are you doing things outside of just the corporate sector?
Yeah, sure thing. So we operate on sort of the TOMS model, where for every company that we partner with, we donate nonprofit access or subsidize nonprofit access. And so
That's
that's
awesome.
reached a number of universities, nonprofits. That's probably the most exciting part of the work that we do. And it's been incredible being able to support organizations that really need accessible learning over the course of the past few years. So.
Well, the good news for that is you're making an impact on folks earlier on, so that they have a better trajectory than maybe some of the folks that who didn't have that opportunity. The challenge for us as learning professionals is the next generation has wildly different expectations of what they're expecting from corporate learning, and that's only going to get more intense. So the days of being able to be like, well, we'll just keep doing what we've always done.
Yep.
It's not going to fly. It's not going to fly. So, well, as always, Michael, I always appreciate our chats, and I appreciate you taking the time to give me an update on this, and also just chat about what's going on and how we can think about skills and just make learning more meaningful. So thanks for the time, and thanks everybody for watching. It was a great conversation.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Take care.
All right. See ya.